This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HORN HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on September 22nd, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. I just want to start with my usual housekeeping stuff, but to remind you also that because this is a podcast, if you cannot listen live, you can always catch up with the recording anytime. So you can do that by going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And there you can scroll down the page. You'll see the most recent one listed on top, and then there's a button to click that says take me to past archived recordings. So you can certainly do that. You can either listen to the most recent show that's up, posted there, or search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you want to listen again. And while you're there, on the top of that page is a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us needs to keep our sun signs happy. Pretty basic, right? Pretty self-explanatory. I've said before it's based on a print interview I did with Stephen a couple of years ago, and he's given me permission to use it to help spread more knowledge about the validity of astrology. He's all for, people getting tuned into astrology. So be sure to grab it, either when you listen to the podcast or when whether it's live or after the fact, and enjoy some of Stephen's words of astrological wisdom. Now, that will also sign you up for my weekly newsletter, Conversations About Consciousness, but you can also, of course, unsubscribe at any time. Separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page at Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, or on Instagram, where I have started posting more regularly under Karmic Evolution. And that's where I post information about upcoming shows and the content of podcasts and other astro news you can use. So feel free to follow me on either of those sites. Plus, I'm still offering my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners for only $99. And that's for people who want to gain greater consciousness about their soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, who would like to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back in your relationships, your career, with your finances, or your health. And as such, a natal chart reading, or this Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading, can help lead you to a better understanding of what are your old karmic wounds, whether they occurred early in this lifetime and or in past lives, and help you to heal them in ways that allow you to co-create your own future happiness and success through such astrological insight. So this is easy when you take advantage of my 1 hour $99 discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight, and that's for Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast listeners only. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. And you can access this offer at karmicevolution.com/karmic99. Or you can send me an email at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com. All right, so there's a lot to dig into this week. So let's get to this week's Astro News you can use. So today, September 22nd, at 6:04 p.m. Pacific and 9:04 p.m. Eastern Time, the Sun moves into Libra, the Venus-ruled sign that represents fairness, balance, equality, and harmony in relationship. Known as the fall or the autumnal equinox, this ingress is known as one of the two moments of the year when the Sun is exactly above the equator and day and night are of equal length. So it marks the fall in the northern hemisphere, but it marks the spring in the southern hemisphere, where the Sun's entrance, it marks the spring in the southern hemisphere. However, the kind of astrology that I'm talking about and that I practice is Western tropical astrology, which originated in the northern hemisphere. So it's northern hemisphere centric, so to speak. And, so that's why we talk about it being the fall and not the spring. So, of course, northern hemisphere, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, this is where Western tropical astrology originated. Now, the Sun's ingress into Libra is followed by its meetup with or conjunction to Mercury Retrograde in Libra, and it occurs a few hours later today on September 22nd at 11:50 p.m. Pacific or at 2:50 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, September 23rd, depending on your time zone. So the Sun often represents, especially in traditional astrology, an important person, traditional mundane astrology, such as a monarch, a president, a prime minister, a CEO, or other famous personage, as my high school AP English teacher used to say, whose actions might affect a large amount of people. And when the Sun conjoins Mercury, the god of communication, we often hear something coming from the bully pulpit, either from or about one of these important individuals. Now, this can take the form of an announcement, a decree, a rule change, etc., depending on the archetypal nature of the zodiacal sign. So the Sun-Mercury meetup in Libra will have something to do with partnerships, and whether that's for better or worse remains to be seen, though the Libra New Moon can help us sort that out, which I'll get into in a few. I do want to mention, it's a little early, that, of course, this past week on Monday, which was September 19th, we had the funeral of Queen Elizabeth and the ascension, prior to that, of course, at her death, of King Charles III to the throne. So it's a little early for that to have been an effect of the Sun's entrance into Libra and conjunction with Mercury, but bear it in mind as we are moving towards the Libra New Moon on September 25th and some of the the energies that are going to be present or are present now as they're waxing. So we already know we're in a period of review now, since not only Mercury, but 5 planets plus Chiron are currently still retrograde. 5 other planets, that is, right, and Chiron. And I discussed that in greater detail on last week's podcast. So if anybody's interested, just take a look back. I did briefly at least delineate the meaning or the more esoteric meaning of each planet's retrograde period. Now, Mercury will move back from Libra to Virgo tomorrow, September 23rd. But for right now, it's still in the sign of equality-oriented partnership of Libra. So as the Sun enters Libra, a little bit later today at the fall equinox and meets Mercury retro there, it asks us to review relationship imbalances in our lives and to more openly share our point of view with others now. However, it pays to be aware that our views may have changed or are changing still, since Mercury's retrograde began in Libra on September 9th and won't end until October 2nd in Virgo. I forgot now. It's 26 Virgo, I think it is. Anyway, Mercury re-enters earthy, discerning, but critical Virgo on September 23rd, like I said, and we begin to review whether or not our current partnerships provide us a true sense of security. And again, as I explained in last week's podcast, Mercury's retrograde cycles have been shifting from the air element back to the earth element most of this year. And in December of this year, towards the end of the month, we will have the beginning of our final Mercury retrograde this year, or the first retrograde of 2023. And those retrogrades will begin fully in the earth element and remain that way for most of 2023. Something I'll discuss, a little further in a few. So when Venus in Virgo opposes Neptune in Pisces, September 24th. So remember, we have the Sun going into Libra tonight, the Sun meeting Mercury in Libra, and then we have, hold on, did I skip something? Because I want to make sure I got this right. No, that's right. And then on the 24th, we've got Venus in Virgo opposing Neptune in Pisces. And that's an aspect of disillusionment, And so given the order of these aspects, the disillusionment may be around certain announcements or discoveries about partnerships that could well lead to disappointment in relationships, which in turn might cause us to rethink where wishful thinking or self-deceit prevented us from seeing the truth about others. And that calls us to decide if we might have been willing victims when we bought another's lies or deceits. And again, that's because since Mercury will have retrograded back into Virgo by the 24th of September, which it does, as I said, on the 23rd, we're looking at reviewing potentially new details that were previously hidden from view or unknown until now. So it's best to use the Venus-Neptune energy to meditate, or to put ourselves on a higher vibrational plane by tapping into or channeling our creative resources now. So staying grounded helps by being in nature or by water as ways to connect with the higher realm and to hear our higher self, our authentic voice, rather than continuing to buy into someone else's lies, illusory, concepts, confusion, or delusion now. So any disappointment or disillusionment with a partner now reminds us of the August 27th Virgo New Moon's entreaty to plant seeds that revolve around being perfect in all our imperfections. And the September 10th Pisces full moon called us to release our attachment to continuing to try to be or achieve perfection, and instead to work on loving ourselves, warts and all. So if we've released our attachment to being perfect or perfectionism, and our attempts to achieve perfection usually manifest through trying to control our environment or the behavior of others. And remember, this is a process. So there's no sense in beating ourselves up, right? Because if we didn't overnight, become someone who understood we don't have to be perfect all the time, that's a little unrealistic, right? But what we're saying is that some of this Venus-Neptune opposition is usually a projection, right? We might project our own greatness onto other people because we've denied that we actually feel like we're great. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm saying, we have to love ourselves, right? So if part of love is not deceiving yourself, then, hopefully you don't manifest others who deceive you or us, right? I'll get into that in a minute, so hopefully that'll make a little more sense. But It's now that the September 25th Libra New Moon is going to call us to plant seeds that allow us to accept ourselves as our own best partner. And that means a partner we can love, trust, and have and hold until, forever. So the Libra New Moon occurs at 2 degrees and 49 minutes of the sign of fairness and equality and partnership at 2:55 p.m. Pacific and 5:55 p.m. Eastern on September 25th, which is this Sunday for those of us who are in the Western Hemisphere. In the time zones, anyway. The United States time zones is what I'm giving from the West Coast to the East Coast. Anyway, the Libra Moon opposes Jupiter exact in Aries shortly after this lunation perfects, while the Sun perfects its opposition to Jupiter on September 26th, the day after. Therefore, this lunation brings a strong message that, on one hand, we may resist attempts to control or constrain our freedom, especially in terms of freedom of thought or related to our personal belief system, which is Jupiter's realm, as is the realm of our personal beliefs in terms of religious beliefs, but that being overly optimistic about our beliefs or overly enthusiastic may cause others to consider us arrogant, self-righteous, and perhaps pedantic. Now, no one likes to be lectured by someone who's focused only on the big picture, but forgets about important details that might change the equation substantially, right? I mean, Venus in Virgo's earthy trine to Pluto in Capricorn later September 25th or early on the 26th, again, depending on your time zone, add an element of intensity to our relationships now. But it also empowers us, especially as Mercury Retrograde meets Venus in Virgo September 26th too. And that empowers us to be able to look in the mirror and say, I love you, to ourselves, to our reflection, without cringing. Right? That's something that, some of you may remember Louise Hay writing about in her, How to Heal Your Life book or whatever. But I believe that's the title of it. So, How to Heal Your Life, right? How many people find it difficult to do that? So during this period when Venus and when Mercury and Venus meet up, which is going to happen right after Venus trines Pluto, right? So these two also are coming shortly within range of each other. Mercury retrograde Venus conjunct Venus is a mental transit that allows us to intellectually appreciate beauty and objects to art, as well as our partners and loved ones. As Rob Hand, renowned astrologer, says in his book Planets in Transit, and here I quote, on an abstract level, this transit can enable you to see the patterns running through your perception and experience that help tie everything together so that you can understand your life as a whole. So when we look at this in the context of Mercury's backward move into Virgo, and that this begins a period where we question, according to Jungian astrologer Erin Sullivan in her book Retrograde Planets Traversing the Inner Landscape, the question is, what are the tangible results of my life? And we can see how this fits in with recent changes in our economy, for example, both domestically in the U.S. and globally, especially since the pandemic began in 2020 and supply chain and issues and rising interest rates, etc., have plagued us all in some form or another. And by supply chain issues, we mean shortages, right? Security matters, Sullivan says. And again, I quote from her book, practical concerns and the most basic needs come to the fore in this phase. That Mercury's, and here, end quote, that Mercury's reentrance into Virgo corresponds with the Venus-Neptune opposition now highlights even more Sullivan's advice for Mercury retrogrades in the Earth element. Quote, you are undoubtedly needing to reassess your contact with the world of practical reality. but it is unwise to invalidate the past, which has probably done just fine up to now. Rather, look at your assets and liabilities as if they were someone else's, which is to say more objectively, right? And go over the kind of advice you would give them. It is imperative that objectivity be maintained in this cycle when Earth is being accented in your chart. End quote. So, on personal levels, look to the natal houses where Mercury's Virgo, Saturn's Capricorn, and Venus's Taurus rule for more insight into what areas of life you'll find this to be most necessary in. Beginning now, I mean, like I said, the Mercury retrogrades this year have been morphing back or retrograding back from air into Earth, but by December of this year, they'll be strictly in Earth, except for one of them, one of the cycles next year, so 2023. But that's a big message to keep in mind. Now, combined with the Sun's opposition to Jupiter, which follows shortly after on September 26th, we can see how this Libra New Moon might allow us to not only become more conscious of which partners are quote-unquote right for us and which, well, maybe not so much, but also how the partners we manifest, or how the partners we manifest, we really manifest, sorry, I'm tripping over my words here. Partners we manifest really come out of our own inner energies. So my point here is that when the Sun and the Moon come together in Libra and oppose Jupiter, if we aren't solidly partnered lovingly with ourselves first, we stand less of a chance of projecting such self-love outward and drawing to us those who also have a healthy love of themselves and who will then prove to be solidly loving partners to us. So if we attract or are attracted to those who are arrogant as a means of overcoming their inner or unconscious feelings of inferiority, it means that somewhere deep down in the recesses of our own psyche, we're projecting out our own unconscious feelings of inferiority and manifesting through those projections those who reflect our own insecurities back to us, but by turning them inside out into excessive pride, arrogance, hubris, what have you. So this sounds simple in concept, but we know I know anyway, it's one of the hardest things to accomplish. I always say that the universe is benign and has no vested interest in harming any of us. This is my belief anyway. Rather, it provides us opportunities every moment of every day to grow in consciousness. It's simply up to us to recognize these moments and to understand them as part of our pathway towards soul growth through higher consciousness. Now, a good explanation, as we're waxing toward all of the elements described thus far, and I've explained previously how astrological aspects, energies, are really at their height as they approach becoming exact, can be found in what's already manifested during this waxing period leading up to the Libra New Moon. Now, some of us have heard these announcements, decrees, or perhaps even threats recently in the news. The first I'll mention is the New York Attorney General Letitia James' announcement yesterday, September 21st, that New York State has filed a lawsuit against the Trump Organization, accusing the former president of profiting from, and here I quote, a staggering fraud. Donald Trump, I'm sorry, I usually attribute this. I think this is from the New York Times, yesterday's paper. Donald Trump, his family business, and 3 of his children lied to lenders and insurers for more than a decade, according to the New York Attorney General Letitia James, who accused him of fraudulently overvaluing his assets by billions of dollars in a sprawling scheme. She's seeking to bar the Trumps from ever running a business in the state again. Ms. James concluded in a sweeping lawsuit filed on Wednesday that Mr. Trump and his family business violated several state criminal laws and plausibly broke federal criminal laws as well. Her office, which in this case lacks authority to file criminal charges, referred the findings to federal prosecutors in Manhattan, and it was not immediately clear whether the U.S. attorney would investigate. Now, that's an interesting question, especially since we just had the release of the Jeffrey Berman, who was the former SDNY head. His book just came out, and it's been all over the news if anybody has an interest or has paid attention to it. But, he documents a lot of the times which cases they take and which they don't. So it'll be interesting to see whether New York, but Southern District of New York is one of the most powerful prosecutors or, divisions of the DOJ on the state level of any in the nation. So it'll be interesting to see. The article goes on, in a 220-page lawsuit filed in New York State Supreme Court, or the 220-page lawsuit, lays out in new and startling detail how, according to Ms. James, Mr. Trump's annual financial statements were a compendium of lies. The statements, yearly records that include the company's estimated value of his holdings and debts, wildly fluctuated the worth of nearly every one of his marquee properties, from Mar-a-Lago in Florida to Trump Tower and 40 Wall Street in Manhattan, according to the lawsuit. And this from MSNBC, which I think is interesting and doesn't take up too much more time. But their headline said, the biggest blow from Letitia James' lawsuit wouldn't be to Trump's wallet. And I quote, New York Attorney General Letitia James seeking $250 million from former President Donald Trump, his family, and their business, per a lawsuit filed Wednesday. But as much as a $250 million fine would hurt Trump, New York is seeking something that might hurt Trump even more. The potential prohibitions on the Trumps buying property and running businesses could essentially throw him, his family, and their business out of New York forever. And, the author of this article, whose name's Hayes Brown on MSNBC, says that would be just desserts for the narcissistic businessman who has always sought love from New York. And then there's this other legal announcement. Remember, Sun Moon is approaching in our opposition to Jupiter, from the Washington Post, also yesterday, September 21st. And that reads as follows. Appeals court sides with Justice Department in Mar-a-Lago case, allowing part of the investigation to move forward without limits. Prosecutors had sought a stay against a lower court ruling that barred investigators from using the roughly 100 classified documents seized from former President Donald Trump's Florida residence and club. The decision means that part of the criminal investigation can now move forward without restrictions. The decision Wednesday also overrode the judge's order that a special master should review the classified material. Now, we can see how legal cases, based on sloppy legal arguments, filled with the arrogance and self-righteousness of people like Donald Trump, are not standing up to legal scrutiny, even by judges appointed by Trump himself, right? This appeals court has 6 out of 11 judges that were appointed by him. And next we have the fact that the special master, who was agreed upon between Trump's lawyers and the DOJ lawyers, who was appointed, after they submitted their picks by Judge Aileen Cannon in this case, has expressed displeasure with Trump's attorneys over their inability for straight talk related to Trump's alleged declassification of top-secret documents found at Mar-a-Lago. According to Daily Kos, which is admittedly a Democratic partisan site, and which posted on September 20th, the headline, Trump got the special master he wanted, but he's finding that Judge Deary isn't what he expected. And the piece goes on, now that he has the special master he requested to deal with the documents he hoarded at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump is already finding reasons to object to the process. Specifically, Trump's legal team is refusing to talk about whether or how Trump actually tried to declassify any of the documents by claiming it would harm their defense to the merits of any subsequent indictment. In other words, the article goes on, what they're saying is that if they reveal that Trump didn't declassify any documents, that could subject him to legal action for stealing and holding highly classified information, which he did, according to this article. And if Trump claims he did declassify documents, then he'll have to prove that in court and also be subject to possible charges over failure to follow the law regarding declassification. Plus, there's the whole perjury issue and the issue of Trump's obstructing an investigation that comes with lying about the whole thing. End quote. But Daily Kos also reported yesterday on September 21st, and here I quote again, "First hearing with Special Master Judge Dearie turns into special disaster for Trump's legal team." And they write, Judge Raymond Dearie conducted his first hearing as Special Master over the documents the FBI removed from Mar-a-Lago on Tuesday, and it was not a good day for Donald Trump's legal team. Dearie not only insisted that the whole thing should move along quickly, threatening the delay Trump so desperately wants, he instantly blasted apart the idea that Trump's, what happened to my, I don't have the rest of this, oh no, where did it go? Hold on a second. My document's messed up. Let me see if I can find what I was reading from. Something got lost, I guess, when I was working on this document. He blasted apart the idea. Well, from what I remember, he was saying that the sentence that ended the piece was, "You can't have your cake and eat it too." You know, so in other words, you can't say that you legally own the documents, but you won't prove that you declassified them, or you legally had the right to declassify them, that you actually did that, and that, you know, there's no legal recourse now against you. And he's saying, you know, you can't have it both ways, right? Either you declassified them or you didn't, but even still, they belong to the National Archives, meaning they belong to the American people, to the government and the American people. Now, in another piece yesterday, which on one hand I think was surprising, but on the other hand, not at all. Hang on. I'm quoting here. A federal jury has convicted former Trump political advisor Steve Bannon of 2 counts of criminal contempt for Congress for intentionally defying a subpoena related to the assault on the U.S. Capitol last year, according to NPR. Quote, Bannon put on no defense in the case, which featured, talk about, like, you know, the projection of arrogance, right? Because if you've seen any clips of him at all, he's just all this puffery, right? Just puffs out his chest. This is over this, and we have to overthrow the government. You know, he's just this blustery whatever. I'll let you all fill in an adjective. But he put up no defense in the case, which featured testimony from just 2 government witnesses, including the Deputy Staff Director of the House Select Committee investigating the events of January 6th. The Justice Department told jurors the case was black and white, as simple as the words on the subpoena to Bannon last autumn. The defendant chose allegiance to Donald Trump over compliance with the law, Assistant U.S. Attorney Molly Gaston said in closing arguments. Now note that, you know, well, what I said here is, if that's not a waxing sun opposite Jupiter statement, I don't know what is, right? Because, you know, again, we're coming up to the Libra New Moon, and I was saying that we have to choose, right, who we're partnering with. So here she's saying, you know, you partnered with Donald Trump instead of partnering with the law. And so, you know, the opposition here becomes very clear. Now, along those lines, we also have today's news that Ginny Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, whose known texts implored Trump's chief of staff Mark Meadows and others to throw out valid slates of electors on January 6th and instead certify electoral state slates comprised of fake electors, has agreed to go before the January 6th committee to answer questions, or presumably maybe to plead the fifth. I mean, we'll see, right? The question remains whether or not her husband will recuse himself from upcoming Supreme Court cases related to election fraud, etc. And I saw somewhere, and I'm sorry I didn't have time to look it up, there is a case on the docket now that will come up that's related to, I'm not sure if it's the electoral law, right? The law of the electors. But meanwhile, yesterday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill that overhauls the Electoral Count Act in Congress. And that bill makes it 100% absolutely clear that the vice president cannot throw out or override in any way state electoral count votes, and that the role of a vice president is purely ceremonial. Now, the Senate, however, is still working on its own version of the bill, and it remains to be seen if the end result of that is similar or not, and regardless whether there will be enough GOP senators to override a filibuster against a vote for it. So stay tuned on that, but, things are moving along, right? And I picked up this piece, which I was kind of amused about because it's from the Virginia Mercury. I was just amused by the name at this particular junction with Sun Mercury. And the headline of this story is U.S. House passes bill reforming Electoral Count Act to stop January 6th repeat. Senate developing separate version of legislation. All right, so to switch off of that, but to continue with all of the news of these past few days or past week, we have also the recent ridiculously cruel political stunt by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who loaded immigrants, most of them from Venezuela, onto planes and flew them to Martha's Vineyard, which is, for those who don't know, a wealthy enclave in Massachusetts. Now, the Washington Post headline from September 16th reads, Reverse Freedom Rides, an echo of Martha's Vineyard migrant flights 60 years ago, which, if you think about it, is roughly 2 Saturn returns ago. And I haven't had a chance to look it up, but I have to remind myself to do that. So maybe next week I'll mention it. But it's some kind of recurrence, obviously. Some energy is recurring, whether it's Saturn square Uranus or something different. I don't know, but I didn't think to look it up before the show. So the Washington Post article says, and I quote, tricked by segregationists with promises of work and housing, Black families were dropped in Cape Cod with nothing. That's from 60 years ago. Sound familiar? It was all part of the so-called reverse freedom rides arranged by white segregationists in 1962 in retaliation for the freedom rides of the previous summer, when black and white volunteers rode buses through the South supporting desegregation. Today's migrants in Martha's Vineyard are now being transported to the same Cape Cod military base that housed the reverse freedom riders decades ago. And on September 20th, obviously as a result of the actions taken and reported about by September 16th, Politico reported, quote, the lawsuit filed by the Boston-based Lawyers for Civil Rights, there was a lawsuit filed, I guess I should have said that first, alleges that DeSantis and state transportation officials violated the migrants' constitutional rights, accusing him of orchestrating a premeditated, fraudulent, and illegal scheme to fly dozens of migrants from San Antonio, Texas, to Martha's Vineyard. The lawsuit alleges that DeSantis and state transportation officials violated the migrants' constitutional rights by coercing mostly Venezuelan asylum seekers onto planes in Texas to the island through false promises and misrepresentations. It also accuses DeSantis of inappropriately using federal coronavirus relief funds to pay for the flights. And, there's a lot to be said about misusing taxpayer dollars, which I think they're also accusing Governor Abbott of doing in Texas, since he's done the same thing, because he sent a busload of, he sent busloads of migrants to Washington, D.C. He sent them to New York City. I think he sent them to Chicago. So, I haven't seen any lawsuits, which doesn't mean they don't exist, that have been filed against him. But I have seen mention of the fact that in order to complete this transportation, they have used, both DeSantis and Governor Abbott in Texas, taxpayer dollars. So let's move to the more international front, and we have President Biden's address to the UN yesterday, and this is from PBS. Quote, President Joe Biden declared at the United Nations on Wednesday that Russia has, quote, shamelessly violated the core tenets of the international body with its war in Ukraine, as he summoned nations around the globe to stand firm in backing the Ukrainian resistance. Now we see the marriage of the sun and the moon in Libra, right? Let's stand firm. Let's partner. Delivering a forceful condemnation of Russia's 7-month invasion, Biden said reports of Russian abuses against civilians and its efforts to erase Ukraine and its culture should make your blood run cold. It's a good Scorpio quote, right? He's a Scorpio sun. He referenced President Vladimir Putin's announcement Wednesday, another Sun Mercury announcement, that he, Putin, had ordered a partial mobilization of reservists, a deeply unpopular step that sparked protests in Russia. And Biden said Putin's new nuclear threats against Europe showed, quote, reckless disregard for Russia's responsibility as a signer of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. He, Biden, criticized Russia for scheduling sham referenda. Again, Libra New Moon opposite Jupiter, anyone? This week, in territory it has forcibly seized in Ukraine. Basically what he's saying that, Russia is saying that because they have populated part of Crimea back since 2014, he's essentially saying that he's going to take a vote in those territories, and that will count as part of a vote, a Russian vote, right? Because they're saying also that this is Putin's way of saving face, since he's losing the war in Ukraine, has lost a lot of soldiers and equipment, and therefore he's just going to go back to taking that Crimea portion of Ukraine and maybe make some kind of truce agreement, whatever, settlement, right? But Biden went on to say here, a permanent member of the UN Security Council invaded its neighbor, attempted to erase a sovereign state from the map. Russia has shamelessly violated the core tenets of the UN Charter. He called on all nations, whether democracies or autocracies, to speak out against Russia's brutal, needless war and to bolster Ukraine's effort to defend itself. We will stand in solidarity against Russia's aggression, period, Biden said. He also highlighted consequences of the invasion for the world's food supply, pledging $2.9 billion in global food security aid to address shortages caused by the war and the effects of climate change. And here I would just add Uranus in Taurus being squared more tightly again now by Saturn in Aquarius, starting the end of this month. It is the end of September almost. And that will last. They won't square exact again as they did in 2021, but they will come very close. So we're looking at that, and we're looking at Mercury's re-entrance, as I noted, into earthy Virgo, since Virgo is the sign associated with grain, wheat, and the harvest. Now, Biden praised a UN-brokered effort to create a corridor for Ukrainian grain to be exported by sea and called on the agreement to be continued despite the ongoing conflict. I haven't seen anything lately about that, but the Russians had reneged on some of that. So I don't know where that stands now. But anyway, I believe Biden's UN speech came after this announcement as documented by the New York Times on September 21st, and that reads as follows. 10 imprisoned foreign fighters, including Americans, are released as part of a Russia-Ukraine exchange, Saudi Arabia says. U.S. and British citizens have been transferred to Saudi Arabia as part of an exchange between Russia and Ukraine, Saudi officials said on Wednesday. The Saudi Foreign Ministry said on Twitter that Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, had mediated the release. You pick up any Libra energy in that? So that leads me to say, a little change in partnerships, since Biden visited Saudi a little while ago, despite having previously labeled the country a pariah since the killing and dismemberment of Saudi-born dissident and Washington Post journalist Khashoggi. As they say politics makes for strange bedfellows, right? So I just want to point that out. But the article continues, and I quote here, the timing of the release was striking, coming just hours after Vladimir Putin of Russia intensified his war effort in Ukraine by announcing plans to call up roughly 300,000 reservists. That's another big waxing sun Mercury announcement, right? You want to wake up in Russia and go, oh, damn, am I one of those 3,000? To fight while also taking the West to task over its support for Ukraine with a veiled threat of using nuclear weapons. So the arrest, reads the Times. Is this the Times, did I say? Yeah. The arrest of foreigners in Ukraine has alarmed human rights advocates and Western governments, raising questions about the protections afforded to thousands of foreign-born fighters serving in the country, some of whom have been taken prisoner on the battlefield. The released prisoners included several who had been sentenced to death in Russia-occupied eastern Ukraine. And last I saw, there were 2 Americans who were involved in that, and several British people, 4 or 5. So there's definitely other news from these past few days, and there's so much that I can't really cover it here. But I will mention on the lighter side, for baseball fans out there, that the New York Yankee Aaron Judge broke Babe Ruth's 60 home run record at September 20th's game, as well as the fact, and this kind of amused me greatly, that Robert Sarver, the owner of the NBA, that's basketball team, the Phoenix Suns, quote, on Wednesday said he is seeking buyers for the team a week after being suspended for a year and fined $10 million by the National Basketball Association following an investigation into allegations of workplace misconduct, according to Reuters News yesterday, September 21st. An independent investigation found that Sarver, who bought the Suns and the WNBA's, as the Women's League, professional basketball players, the WNBA's Phoenix Mercury. So we have the Suns and the Mercury team, right? As the sun is approaching its conjunction to Mercury. I mean, give me a break, right? So he apparently bought the team, or the women's team, in 2004, and the accusations against him that resulted in his fines he had engaged in inequitable conduct toward female employees, including, quote, sex-related comments and inappropriate remarks on female employees' appearances. He was also accused, I believe, I don't know if it was from the NBA or the WNBA or both, about using ethnic slurs and words that are insulting. So Sarver's also, what I said is, the fact that he announced the sale of both of these on the eve of, like I said, the Libra Sun Mercury conjunction just made me laugh and say, you really can't make this shit up, right? It's just too funny. And on another note, as we progress past the Libra New Moon and into next week, so this energy is still waxing during the Libra New Moon, which falls September 21st. Mars in Gemini trine Saturn in Aquarius on September 27th or 28th, depending on your time zone. And that's going to be an excellent time, meaning really starting now or starting over the weekend. Some of us like to work on the weekends and some of us don't, but it's an excellent time to work slowly and methodically through anything that we put our minds to. And that's because the natural exuberance, impatience, or impetuousness of Mars is tempered by its easy aspect to Saturn, which slows Mars down, but not to its detriment. Rather, it can result in carefully done work that will result in greater respect by authority figures, bosses, etc. So we can focus on more modest or specifically defined goals right now, because we're aware or will be aware of what kind of end result we desire. There's a lot of clarity in that, right? And given that September 28th is the next date that the January 6th committee has scheduled for its hearing, and I'm not sure if it's their final hearing. There's always a lot of talk about not releasing information that might affect the upcoming elections within 60 days, and clearly this is a little less than that. I think yesterday or the day before they were saying 49 days left before the election, the midterm elections. But this will air in prime time here in the U.S. So it stands to reason that the Mars-Saturn energy, as it's waxing right now, because we know that they are pretty much always thinking on their feet here. Anyone who's paid attention to the January 6th committee, right? They get their information, put it together quickly. They're thorough, right? But fast, and that's clear. That seems to me to be the Mars-Saturn trine leading up to the 28th will provide them with even more of an ability to work diligently and be very, very clear and concise. And the part that caught my attention, of course, is that it's all designed specifically to get the end result that they desire, which we know is, no matter what anyone says, to influence the U.S. population against voting for, obviously Donald Trump is not on the ballot, but many of his QAnon and other believers and people who believe in the election fraud hoax, that they're on the ballot throughout the country. So I would assume that their desired result is to really make some of these people think twice. Now, we might say that they're too mired in their ideology to be able to do that. And that, again, might be part also of the Saturn's tightening of its square to Uranus right now. That one holds fast to its ideological assumptions or beliefs, which Saturn in Aquarius, and also for some tradition. I'm a member of the GOP. I've always been a member of the GOP. My mother, my father, my granddaddy. I'm going to keep being a member of the GOP. That kind of thing where they're not really thinking about the issues. They're thinking more about their families' or community's traditional loyalty. But that this committee might more influence the swing voters. As well as perhaps, we'll see, be interesting to see if there's any kind of shout out sort of to the issue of abortion, not directly, because that's not directly involved at all, obviously, with the January 6th committee's, mission, right? But just something that makes women stop and think, and then connect that to the recent Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision that outlawed abortion on a federal level and left it up to each individual state. So we may have to use our intuition to put those pieces together without stretching too hard, but it'll be interesting just to see if we pick up any of those threads, But again, the Mars-Saturn trine coming so close to this hearing, which again is airing in prime time, which means there'll be more or higher or greater numbers of people actually watching it. It will stand to reason that they may well achieve their desired result with the American public. So, as always, time will tell, and we shall see. But I just want to have just a few minutes left. I want to see if there's anything else that I can tell you about the Libra full moon. But basically, I think we covered it all, It's really, if I had to sum up, in addition to what I've already said, that we're going to evaluate our partnerships based on where those partnerships make us feel the most secure about our actual earthy, financial, or other forms of security, or our resources, right? And that includes, of course, food and water, but, as well as what we have in the bank. But that the Venus opposite Neptune, it may cause us, along with Mercury's retrograde and moving back into detail-oriented Virgo, to actually have revealed more details about why we might not be able to trust certain people, either in our personal lives or in the political realm. Just as an aside, the stuff about the NBA and WNBA owner is like, that's hidden information that came to light through an investigation, very Virgo, right? Where he was revealed to be a misogynist and a, a racist, So they penalized him, and he said, well, I'm going to take all my toys and go home. I'll sell my companies. That'll get me out of this. So, you can see the deflection of actual, he says he's owned up. Some of the quotes in these articles say that, he's so sorry, but he's just wants to leave it all behind and ignore it. He doesn't actually want to do anything about it, right? But those are pretty much the biggest things, along with, like I said, the other aspects, the Venus trine Pluto and the Mars trining Saturn. I think that's about it. So I am going to sign off and tell you thank you so much for listening today. And I hope that you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on September 29th for another podcast episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come.